Have you ever experienced emotional abuse from a woman? Now, in this video, I'm talking about quite a heavy topic, quite a deep topic, and quite a vulnerable topic for me specifically. And it's something that just doesn't get spoken about often enough. And in this video, I'm going to talk about my personal experience with this. I'm going to talk about why this happens. I'm going to talk about signs that it's happening to you. And I'm going to talk about how to break the cycle if you're in this cycle right now, and how to avoid the cycle in the future. Now I want you to picture this. I'm sat there in a restaurant waiting for my girlfriend at the time. I look at my phone, she's now 40 minutes late. I check my WhatsApp and the messages that I sent to her asking her where she is, none of them got a response. But she did see them, I saw the 2 blue ticks. I'm sat there waiting, I'm on my phone, I'm looking around me, other people are kind of looking over like, you know, this guy's on his own, it's very clear that it's like a table for 2 kind of thing, and I'm waiting. Now 20 minutes after this is now an hour late, she comes walking into the restaurant, not with a sense of urgency, but with a sense of, you know, kind of thing. She sits down, says, "Hey, how you doing?" And at this point, I'm angry, which is uncharacteristic for me, because at this point in my life, I was, to be very honest with you, I was a bit of a wimp. I was needy, I was too nice, I wasn't very assertive, I'd not integrated my masculinity, I was just a wimp, basically. There's no other way of putting it. I say to her, "Look, you're an hour late. Why?" Now at this point, she basically blows up. She accuses me of not understanding her, she accuses me of not listening to her, she accuses me of not being empathic to the fact that the trains were delayed and she had a rough day. She accused me of a bunch of different stuff and told me that I was wrong for being angry, I was being unfair, and that I had no reason to be angry. The painful thing is, the thing that's embarrassing for me to admit, is that I believed her. I then felt guilty for being angry. I felt ashamed for being angry. I felt like I was being a bad person. I felt like I wasn't being kind. I then apologised. I apologised for being angry that my girlfriend was an hour late and she had not told me a decent enough reason. And it was only after the end of this relationship where she ultimately lost respect for me, she lost attraction for me, and she cheated on me, eventually leaving me. It was only after this experience did I then start to reflect on the whole relationship and realise that I'd actually been in an emotionally abusive cycle. Maybe you can relate to this, but I'm just going to talk about some signs that you are in an emotionally abusive relationship. I'm talking about the signs from the perspective of, this is exactly what I went through. This is not a comprehensive list, but these are the things that I basically experienced in that relationship. Now the first sign is you feel guilty or ashamed for basically everything, for even the littlest things. The second thing is you don't trust yourself, you don't trust your own frame of reference. Now if we use that example I just gave, I didn't trust my own anger, I didn't trust that I was actually right about this, I didn't trust that maybe I had a point. I just had no trust and no ground under my feet. The third thing is you have piss poor self-confidence. If you're in an emotionally abusive pattern, this is basically a self-perpetuating feedback loop that's telling you that you don't deserve any better. So this actually continuously cripples your self-confidence and your self-esteem. You stop thinking that you deserve any better. The fourth thing is you feel ashamed and you don't want to talk to anyone about the situation. Maybe at this point, certain friends, certain people around you are reflecting to you that this pattern you're in, this relationship you're in, is not good for you. And maybe you're not listening to them, maybe you're in denial, maybe you don't want to accept the full weight of the situation and the damage it's causing you. Maybe you're just stuck there and you don't want to accept it. The fifth thing is you crave her attention and approval. Now, in an emotionally abusive dynamic, it can happen where sometimes she's very affectionate and sometimes she isn't. And this sort of on-off creates this kind of like cycle of dependency. It's the way our brains work. I'll talk about that in a little while, but the point is, one of the signs is that you're actually craving her approval and her validation, sexually as well. And the last thing is that you have really poor boundaries, you're very unassertive, and you're basically terrified of upsetting her. Now, why does this happen? Now, one of the things I'm not going to do is try and dissect her psychology, because I really don't think that this empowers you at all. I think as long as you maintain this victim frame, that she's the abuser and I'm fine and I have absolutely nothing to do with it, as long as you maintain that, you disempower yourself. I'm going to dissect this from the perspective of how have you entered into this dynamic? What was it that allowed you to co-create such a shitty situation for yourself? And why did you continuously, or do you continuously, accept this situation as it's going on? Now there's 3 reasons I can think of as to why this happens. The first reason is you have poor boundaries, you have low self-worth, and you have very poor assertiveness. remember this: you accept the love you think you deserve. The second reason is you are potentially replaying old relationship dynamics, right? You're essentially playing old relationship patterns that feel familiar to you. Maybe throughout your upbringing, you had experiences that were similar to the relationships you've had, where your needs were not valued, your boundaries weren't respected. But this actually, throughout your childhood, became familiar to you because that's all you ever really had. And now it would be unfamiliar to you and thus scary to be in a relationship where your boundaries were respected. So in a sense, maybe you just accept this because it's familiar. In that relationship example I gave earlier, there were aspects of that relationship that were very similar to relationship dynamics with my caregivers as I was growing up. And the third thing is, there's something in you, potentially, that unconsciously gets something from this situation. There's some sort of payoff. There's something that is being fed in your unconscious. Now in that relationship, I was addicted to the moments where she would show approval, validation, and affection. Now it was like a gambling thing. It was like in a casino. It was like on off. Sometimes she'd be very cold and harsh. Sometimes she'd be very warm and affectionate. And I would see the whole situation as, how can I change my behavior so she can be more affectionate to me? And when she was affectionate to me, I felt like I'd won something. And the dopamine hit of that was like a drug. It was like an infatuation. It felt intoxicating. And especially when we had sex and she was really into it, it felt intoxicating. It felt like I'd finally won. It felt like I meant something. I'd finally cracked the code and won the game. I was addicted to the emotional infatuation of the situation. And that was one of the reasons why I stayed in this dynamic for so long. So those were 3 reasons why this kind of thing happens. Now, how do you get out of this? How do you break the cycle? How do you prevent this from happening in the future? And if you're in this cycle now, how do you get out of it? First of all, I want you to remember that you are not a victim. You're not a victim, and she is not the perpetrator that's dishing out all this pain and sorrow your way. I want you to see this thing as a co-creation. And I also want you to take responsibility for your part in all this. There's aspects in your unconscious, there's aspects in you that's creating this dynamic, or feeding it, or bringing it into your life, or invited it into your life in the first place. And there's parts of her psychology that also feed into this too. You are way more powerful than you could imagine. You're not a victim. And when you start to notice yourself slipping into victim mode, I want you to catch this and then ask yourself, what am I going to do about it? What can I do about it? The second thing I would like you to do is to ask a safe person or safe people for help. There's so much stigma around emotional abuse from men. We think, as men, we think that it means something about us. It means that we're pathetic or we're weak or whatever for allowing this situation to happen. So we don't share it with anybody. The shame is really strong, so we just stay quiet, we try and deny it to ourselves, and we try and distance ourselves from other people who tell us that we might be in this dynamic. But one of the things I'd like you to remember is this is indeed a reflection of some unprocessed emotion, grief, trauma, whatever the case is in you that allows this thing to continue and develop. However, this is not specifically something with you. This kind of pain, this kind of unprocessed trauma is like a universal human aspect, right? It's part of our shared suffering, it's part of our shared humanity. And this thing is way more common than you think. So it's not something specifically about you, it's just this pain that all of us go through, and you're just experiencing a bit of it. The third thing I'd like you to do is to join a men's group or find a brotherhood of emotionally supportive men who are not afraid to tell you when you're screwing up, who are not afraid to tell you their honest opinion and feedback of you and your situation. Remember this, yes men are not your friends. If you're going through some crazy shit, and if you're making mistakes, and if you're in a dynamic that's not helping you, and your people around you just don't say anything to you because they don't want to hurt your feelings in the moment, they are not your friends. The fourth thing, which I talk about quite often, is to build your VIP. Your values, your identity, and your purpose. One of the emotionally abusive dynamics that can occur in relationships is this codependent dynamic. It's where two people essentially lack a solid sense of identity as an individual. So what they'll do is they'll co-create an identity within this bubble of a relationship, right? Now, it's important for you in an emotionally abusive situation, or if you want to avoid an emotionally abusive situation in the future, is to develop this strong core foundation of who you really are. This way you'll be a mountain. You won't be so easily swayed by other people's opinions. You'll have this solid trust in yourself and feel confident in telling that person no, or distancing yourself from that person, or drawing some boundaries. The fifth thing is to get clear on what you will and will not tolerate in your relationships. Rather than just being a passive nice guy who lets people walk all over him, I want you to practice being a bit of a monster. I want you to sharpen your teeth. I want you to get comfortable with telling people no. I want you to get comfortable with pissing people off. If it means you're not overstepping their boundaries, if it means just asserting your boundaries and your needs and it pisses people off as a byproduct, I want you to get comfortable with that. Comfortable not pleasing everybody, not being nice to everybody, and not thinking that you need to create good emotions in everyone all the time in order to be a good person. Practice assertiveness and learn to defend yourself. And just as a side note, if she starts physically attacking you, like throwing plates at you, punching you, biting you, kicking you, etc., which does happen more commonly than you think, then leave the situation, restrain her, and defend yourself, right, in the moment. And then dump her ass immediately, just saying. So if you've ever experienced this before, or know anyone who has, then please pop a comment down below. How did they get through it? Have you got any tips for anyone going through this? Let's talk a little bit more about this, and hopefully we can bring this topic into the conversation a little bit. But just remember, you are not a victim. You're more powerful than you could ever imagine. Okay? All right, boys. I will see you in the next video. Peace.